of 2022.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. And yes, I should have said that. Thank you. I'm Gianpaolo Versace. I'm account executive at the Chase Office Interiors. And yeah, welcome everybody. Today's topic of the webinar is a whole new way of working. We'll be talking for 45 minutes, at least Laura Lee will. She is our guest speaker. And this webinar will be recorded and will be made available within 72 hours at chaseoffice.ca/events. I know we've had a few questions, so I just want to make sure everybody knows this particular webinar is not CEU accredited. However, next month, our next webinar on February 24th will be CEU accredited. So more information will follow on next month's webinar. After our 45-minute presentation, we'll have some time, carve some time out for some questions. Feel free to put your questions into the chat room at any time, and then we will go over them at the end of the presentation. So Laura Lee is our speaker. Laura Lee is a workplace specialist and A&D market manager for Technion out of Calgary. Laura Lee has always had a passion for teaching and imparting knowledge, and I can definitely vouch for that. We've had some great conversations over the past few months. She's a very strong proponent of sustainability. She's a living building challenge ambassador, LEED accredited professional, well accredited professional, and even a well faculty member. And for those of you who are not sure what that means, so Laura Lee can actually teach and help designers and anyone else who wishes to get their WELL AP with their studies and educate them on what WELL is. So very exciting. You know, I know you're passionate about advancing health and well-being in buildings and communities. You promote the value of good design and how it influences business and society and the power to create positive change. So we really like that. It is your show, Laura Lee. So you can take it from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Gianpaolo. I really appreciate that introduction and kicking the year off, I'd say with my first presentation, but I've been doing one every day this week. So this is my third one this week, and I'm happy to do so. Really excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen really fast so that I'm up and going. Here we go. Just an okay and a thumbs up from somebody. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So this isn't a CEU, and one of the reasons why it's fairly new presentation that and information that we put together toward the end of last year. And if by chance it does become a CEU, because sometimes we, you know, once we start that process going, I will let Danny and Gianpaolo know, and I will work to make sure that you would get the credit for that. But I can't, not promising, but if that is how it happens, I will make sure that goes along. But I want to start, just before I start talking about the changes and impacts that we've all experienced in the world of work these past couple of years, because obviously that's our world. I do really want to acknowledge, you know, that this pandemic, I mean, it has, and it continues to take its toll on us worldwide, right? Beyond the many lives lost and those irreversibly impacted, it's also really affected individuals and society, you know, causing disruptions, anxiety, stress, the separation of our loved ones, changes in our routines, the restrictions, the things that the up and down, you know, it's really affected the social and mental health of individuals across the board. We see that all of us, we are connected by a pretty fragile biology, but there are things to be optimistic about. Human beings are resilient. We've seen a lot of that over the last couple of years. There's cause for, like I say, optimism. And this is an opportunity in time, I think, to resolve, to share kind of a common goal to create the future in a world that, in the way that we want to see it. And for our purposes today, the world that we're going to be focusing on will be the world of work. So as I said earlier, This is some information toward the end of the year that we started to compile, and we wanted to look at what we've really learned over the last couple of years, and recognizing that this collective experience that we've gone through has, it has an opportunity for us to be able to reconsider a whole new way of working. In this session, we're going to walk through some of these learnings. We'll discuss how rethinking the idea of the office and the role that it needs to maybe perform moving into the future. We'll discuss sort of that, and then we're going to look at some examples of what we think spaces may look like going forward, and we'll wrap up sort of on that note there. But as we start, for the longest time, our industry really has looked at the needs of business and leadership, the function of an organization to help inform the design and to ensure that offices and workplaces were really created to improve or support productivity. While this has proven to be a really useful approach for many years, when we started up the division of Studio TK at Technion, we chose to kind of look at the office design from a different perspective. And for us, it was the fundamental belief that creating the best work environment is one that is measured in terms of the well-being and maybe more of the effectiveness along with the productivity of the people that were there. And if we examine work through that lens of the individual human experience, it kind of takes on a little bit of a different slant. So when we look through it at this perspective, sometimes it becomes a little bit more obvious as humans. We're pretty different. And I think if you've been on a Technion presentation before or recently in the last little while, I think we often talk about that, how we are very different individuals and we experience things in a different way. And it's whether it's the type of work you do, the department you're in, who you work with, who you need access to, all of these different work needs, they may change from one moment to the next, from one day to the next. So to really look at how the human experience at work unfolds, you really kind of have to understand how you can best facilitate that experience now and into the future. And we first really kind of look to understand us as human beings. It's an important part of the equation. And so there's really kind of two things to understand about humans, and we are individuals at heart for sure, but we are social by nature. And even my introverts that might be on the call here today, it's not that introverts are not social, they just have a different style, a less overt style of socialization. So as individuals, we're all very different from one another. We have different upbringings, we have different cultures, we've experienced different things throughout our lives. We develop different personalities and preferences. We possess different strengths and weaknesses. If you've ever done strength finders, that's a fun thing to do about how different you are within your group of colleagues, but we have different ways of working. And if you think about it, this is really the reason we get hired to do the jobs we do, or for the positions we get. It's because we're a unique combination of all of these different experiences and knowledge and skills. And if we're the one that does those things, that fit both best for what the company is looking for, it's one of the reasons, again, we get the positions we are, that individual set of ingredients that all come within each of us separately. And so it's our contribution to the greater good of an organization, or how we bring value. So on the flip side of this, we do have this social side to us, and it's one of the defining characteristics of humanity. As a matter of fact, it's the thing that unites us. It's baked into our DNA. It's what's carried our species and advanced our species throughout history. And you might actually even call it the currency that allows us to kind of interact and transact and exchange with other humans. It's that socialization aspect. So it's when we nurture both of these things together that humans are capable of pretty extraordinary things. And we've seen that those individual skill sets and strengths coming together in a collective way in this, especially over this past years, to do pretty extraordinary things. And it's something that sometimes we lose sight of that, and sometimes it's not always obvious. And over the last 22 months, our whole way of working, if we think about it was abruptly and completely upended. And so we impacted both our individual and social selves. And when things change really rapidly, it does tend to give you a new perspective. And in this case, our different perspective on work. When there's a gradual change, it's much less life altering. I think we adapt a little bit differently. I kind of think about it when a plant sort of starts to grow towards the sun somewhere. It doesn't usually happen overnight. It just, you kind of notice all of a sudden that your plant is leaning over on one side. But an abrupt change, it just is much more recognizable. And for many of us, it was a really life-altering event, and it did actually kind of put our humanity back into perspective, I think, for many people, and ultimately forced us to kind of reckon with the ways that we used to work and what that might mean to us going forward and how we might want to work in the future. So it's through kind of this lens of the human experience over the past many months and 2 years almost now that we set out to re-examine. So this was the group at Studio TK, that division of our organization that really put this information together. And they wanted to talk about, what does it mean to bring your whole self to work? And that might be the whole self. You might have heard that phrase a fair bit over the last couple of years, because this event kind of threw a lot of people into an existential crisis of being. And we see that whole other discussion, but around, the Great Resignation, or all of these people choosing to do different things. But it really has, besides those individual things, it has forced us to rethink why we need to change the role of the office moving forward, especially in a future of work that may be hybrid. I mean, it's definitely the catchphrase, or the word that's used so often now. But that experience where we're toggling between remote and remote setting in the office, it is a new reality. So when we set out on this quest and to re-examine the past couple of years, we wanted to reflect and try and understand why working remotely taught us about ourselves. What did it teach us about ourselves? So, well, I like to start this discussion around the before times, so I'll call them. It is, just to kind of set a little context there. Before the office helped give our work structure, it organized where we sat, defined hierarchy, how we worked, a lot of times even whom we even sat next to, or who we interacted with, kind of defined our context sometimes, and sort of inherently baked into the floor plan and even possibly the furniture selections. It made certain decisions about how ideas were formed and how information flowed throughout the office. Our offices were built and optimized to meet the needs of the way the world worked. And it's just kind of that structure has evolved over time. And the current situation happened, and the world changed, and everything about work, about work changed with it almost overnight. We no longer had that structure. We had no boundaries or the planning that the office afforded us. We didn't have free coffee anymore. It was just something very different. We definitely banded together across silos and even across companies sometimes just to get things done. We figured it out. And it was kind of out of sheer survival mode for a lot of us. We just had to make adjustments to the way we work. We had to improvise, many people sitting at a kitchen table, desks, our couches, made up these impromptu workstations. We learned how to, maybe put a drape behind us so you couldn't see the kids playing behind you and all that kind of stuff. But we really did we had to flex our schedules, especially for people that were, toggling between being teachers at that time as well, and trying to sort out how to rearrange our days and still make connections. But we had to balance those demands of our work with our personal life and the needs of our clients and our colleagues. So, and in short, we had to make work for us, right? For many of us, it was chaotic. It was overwhelming. The office, which for nearly a century optimized work around how to make the best experience possible and help facilitate productivity. And all of a sudden that shutdown was handed off, and that responsibility was given to each individual to fend for themselves and kind of figure it out. But in spite of all of the challenges, there were silver linings too. And we talked a lot about those, or we heard about those early on. In contrast to that structure that we were used to experiencing, we stumbled onto something that was always there, but may not have been fully recognized or actually activated or cultivated in the past. And that was our sense of autonomy. Amid the challenges of going fully remote, we discovered that there are certain tasks that were more productive than before. When we had our freedom to choose how, where, and when to work, it served us. It served many, and ultimately our may served our teams well, and the bottom line, in some cases, better at the time in comparison to the office. And it as a whole, there were I think there was a collective, that's surprising. And I think it is something that maybe, as I said, wasn't necessarily recognized before, either whether it was within the workforce themselves or at a leadership level. We kind of reflect back on the experience, and there is no going back from the experience, just so you know, when that has been realized, it is something that is with us going forward. So we kind of have rediscovered that importance of our own autonomy as workers, as people out doing the things. The importance of actually nurturing our individual needs came to the forefront, I think, for a lot of people, and recognizing that we're maybe capable of doing a lot more when we have inputs into the ways we work best. And that was, I think, again, that existential crisis that we hear so much about, people recognizing their own autonomy and their own self-direction, and actually taking some action around that. What I think the LinkedIn statistic says, there are currently 66% of workers on LinkedIn are open to new experience or new opportunities. But by default, we can look back at some of the structures that we historically built into the office and realize, intentionally or not, and I do think a lot of times certain things were unintentional. They were just how things evolved. Those things may have put constraints on how we were working, or our autonomy. And it reminds me of a story about something I experienced a couple of years ago when I went to England a few years ago. And I don't know how many of you have been there before, and ventured out into the countryside. I was shocked at how windy the roads were there. And it was almost nauseating to go on a country road, and half the time you could only have one car coming in one direction. And when I was asking my host, like, what like, is it so hard to get land here? And he actually said, no, over the centuries, these roads have just evolved from animal paths. And so basically, we just paved over them, and they're still the roads we're using now. And it's just kind of that ad hoc way things kind of have happened. Same thing with maybe the office a little bit. We moved from the factory floor into the workplace, and we did adopt things like the set time, the set tasks, very distinct roles, all those things that we kind of just, it evolved that way. And again, it's not to say that it was the very best way, but we just kind of intentionally or unintentionally maybe created some of those barriers. So we recognize that in a future, we will have hybrid experiences. We will have this be toggling between our remote setting and the office. We need to be able to create better continuity between these two experiences and rethink the office as a place that can nurture and encourage more individual autonomy. We need to really take this opportunity to implement these learnings from the remote work experience and bring it forward into the next iteration of the office. Missing this opportunity would be unfortunate. It's interesting, and I hear a lot of people talk about this as the biggest workplace experiment ever, which it's not. It hasn't really been the experiment. I think the experiment is about to come. What we've been in is chaos. Experiments have a hypothesis. They have control groups. They have very distinct, ideas and again, hypothesis that we're trying to determine. And there was none of that. This was just like a free for all. But I do believe moving forward, we have this opportunity to create the experiments that will actually find us the best possible outcomes. So that, as individuals, we learned a lot about ourselves, but again, we also learned that we are social animals. We have a power of recognizing our own autonomy through this situation, but we also learned that we need each other. And what we quickly realized, for all the ways that we are able to stay connected through things like Zoom and Slack and Teams and Google Hangout and there are limitations, there's significant limitations to using technology. And although it facilitated the communication that needs to happen, it will continue in the future. It is also a hindrance for spontaneous interactions. While we all started with cocktail parties. I haven't had a cocktail party online for quite some time, but I think I spent the first 2 months of the pandemic having a cocktail party almost every afternoon. I see my boss was in here. She was looking to see if she needed an interaction. I maybe was having a little too much cocktails at that time, but we can socialize over these mediums. There's still significant drawbacks to being isolated from our colleagues, and it wasn't always a seamless experience or an equal experience for everybody who is involved. So, it's because we are social beings, right? We're constantly scanning our surroundings and picking up on information around us. I can tell you, as somebody who presents an awful lot on Zoom, I almost think I need a nap after every one of them, because I can't scan the space. I can't see if what I'm saying is connecting. I can't see if you're left the room, and I can only see 4 people on here at this time. But it's that energy that I feed off. And as somebody who teaches a lot, seeing somebody's recognition of or understanding is something that I miss in these sort of situations. It is a very different experience, and that subconscious that bit that informs us so much about what's going on is really tough for us as human beings. We're readily reading body language. We're picking up on cultural cues and social norms, and especially the culture that exists within an organization that's so important to bonding and bringing people together and being able to work well together. We're drawing on inspiration from other people and ideas that surround us. We take those ideas sometimes, and even in an unconscious way, we may use them to build on and reinvigorate our own ideas. I mean, think of it's really the cornerstone of collaboration, that being in the presence of others. And we, for all the ways we thrive when we're closer together. We recognize that in a remote setting, it just wasn't possible. You can't tell if a colleague is having a terrible day and needs cheering up. And so many of us rely on that in our social interactions, especially the close bonds that we create with the people at work. And actually our friends can't give us a pep talk, especially, I mean, at a certain time, so many people didn't even have their cameras on. So you couldn't even see the expression on people's faces to recognize that maybe they needed some boosting. And think about the culture, experiences that you would have with your colleagues. And think about anybody, I don't know if anybody on here has been a new hire during this experience, but man, how do you connect with understanding what the culture and the purpose of your organization is, and how do you understand your full contribution to that culture when you have never been immersed in it? And it made me think of something else when we were talking about this. Is like, think of all, I don't know if anybody here has met their spouse or their partner or again, their best friend at work, but think of all of those relationships that aren't happening. Depends on what your company policy is on some of that, but I mean, it is such a huge part of our social existence, and not our. I don't want to say our identities, and that might have been a crisis of identity for some people because it may have been part of their such a strong part of their identity, but it's a reminder to us that some of our most powerful and impactful social interactions happen in those unplanned and impromptu situations. Again, it is an important thing. You can plan to check in on people every day and say, hi, you're in good spirits or whatever, but you can't do it without like texting and figuring out when that's going to happen, because it can be disruptive otherwise, right? And it can't be a back and forth always. Somebody might be in a meeting, but you can't plan to uncover new ideas or from a random person you never thought of. Think of all of the great inventions that happened because two people who wouldn't normally collided. Like I think about the Post-it notes, legend of the forklift driver and the guy who wanted to tape his scientist who was making sticky glue. Those things, those aren't happening. You can't plan to see the culture in motion, and there's limits. I think we've definitely can agree on that. So there are, these are just some of the reasons why it's so important to activate our social side by putting people in close proximity to one another. Our need for social actions, as I said before, it's not always obvious. It can't always be planned. It sometimes lives in those subtle interactions we have throughout the day, and it can often lead to the bigger things that exist in our lives and in our work. But looking back and reflecting on the collective experience of the social, I think we all recognize those limitations placed on our social nature by working fully remote, which only, I think, has hopefully helped us appreciate the role the office played in nurturing those social interactions in ways we may not fully understand, or maybe didn't fully appreciate or take advantage of previously. And those people who existed within organizations that had strong cultures and well-designed spaces before maybe felt or recognized that more than the folks that were in spaces that were not nurturing or did not have positive cultures or did not have spaces that inspired them, as as a matter of fact, that might have been more demoralizing. And we do recognize that some of the motivation to be in those spaces or to recognize how impactful the social was on us lies in how well those organizations and spaces were created before. But we definitely know moving forward, most likely that hybrid between the home and the office, for many people, it's going to need to complement one another. We're going to want home to provide what work can't, and work to provide the workplace to provide what home can't. And the biggest one is bringing people together in close proximity to facilitate and to recognize and to nurture and to activate the full potential of each individual and our social interactions. So when we take what we've learned through this experience and about ourselves as individuals and social beings, it helps us show the way towards what we see as the future role of the office. And if you, if we start to map things out, we always love a good graph, and we look at social and individual labels or areas, and we put them on the axis. We've made a two-dimensional graph here, and we've put each on the different axis. Along the side as measured by autonomy, whether you had low autonomy or high autonomy, and social along the top with proximity, so far or near to people. And we learned that remote did a great job for elevating our individuality, but really greatly diminished our ability to activate our social side in a meaningful way. Whereas the office, in retrospect, did a great job, at least had the potential to do a great job at nurturing our social side, as measured by our physical proximity to others. Again, determinant on the environment that existed previously. But in many ways, intentionally or not, it has limited individual individuality and autonomy, we think. So when we think about the future of work in a hybrid world, we recognize that the office is not only an important part of that future, but also has the potential to be best positioned to be able to both nurture our need for individual autonomy and in-person social connection. It is a place where we can actually look to bring our whole self to the office. And it's about honoring both of that individual and social side of our humanity, all of our humanity. But to truly serve the whole self, we need to think about that office differently. We do. For the continuum of individual and social needs to be met, the office has to be thought of as that continuum as well. So to truly nurture the whole self, we need to think of it in terms of whole office. We don't want to think about the office as this series of siloed departments and activities cut off from other departments and other projects that are happening. The office needs to be one continuous place, nurturing a sense of individuality, facilitating connections among other people. So we wanted to pull together, how we might look at doing that. If you were part of a CEU actually at the beginning of last year that was called the New Office Mandate, we spoke about these different ideas and founding pillars of what might help us to create a whole office. The first of obviously being choice, where people provide them that freedom to work where, how, and when, and with whom they do their best work. And this is really probably the most important role that the office can play. And it brings people together, again, establishing a culture and the social norms, and then that connection. And it needs to facilitate the collision of people and the ideas across the office. Again, thinking about the role that the office can play that working in a remote setting just can't provide. We set out this past year to actually look at how we were developing new products, especially in terms of our Studio TK division. We thought about how best to deliver on this concept of the whole office and how it could, how the products that we create could support these ideas of choice, community, and connection, and how space do that as well. And when it comes to choice, that offering the variety of seating, tables for all different types of work, again, reinforcing the idea that people have the freedom to work when, wherever, however, and with whomever, versus, you might need different spaces to have a conversation versus write an email or read a report, or you may need to have different types of environments, or have a different sense or a feeling, even a different setting to help you do your best work. And then obviously open spaces to deliver on the sense of creating a community by providing lines of sight to other parts of the office. So we can actually see people and we can see the culture and the norm settings in action. We very much need a way of getting need to get away from being cut off from the rest of the organization, because so much of those cultural norms get established and solidified when we are in a mix together. And there is a sense of equality that comes from that openness as well. And that is something that's very much strong in our social existence right now, is that sense of equality and connection. Obviously, thirdly, we look beyond individual settings. Instead, how do we stitch those settings together to encourage people to actually flow through the space? We want those collisions to happen. We want those serendipitous moments. We want people to not find themselves in a dead end somewhere, but even to have to kind of be directed to flow past people they maybe normally wouldn't see. So we wanted to kind of look at a space ourselves and look at how do you build something out that maybe delivers on this concept of the whole office. And we started, with this series of spaces that we wanted to stitch together. And the cultural hub, again, sort of professing that if, the existence of the workplace or the office is to bring people together to connect. We started with looking at this space that has this variety of seating, light, open airiness. You could be getting together for a meeting, but you could just be existing there working on your own as well, or have a meeting kind of going on adjacent to you. It's that homey feel. It is a product that we thought would be helpful for that is, this Adventura sofa that we came out with that was a little bit more on a residential look, with the choice of different types of finishes or cushion backs to soften it a bit more. Then we started to pull in more settings that would bleed together to give people the choice of seating options, but also ensuring that there was a sense of connection to those two spaces. So we looked at another culture hub, a little bit smaller, again, maybe not as formal meeting space, but a place where you could be, kind of reminds me a little bit of like a hotel lobby area where, you're activated. And I've often done a lot of really good work in those types of spaces. But again, the Pedal Lounge, which was a product that we developed during this time as well, in-house with the Studio TK group, to support those kind of spaces, again, soft and welcoming. Again, if we're going to bother to come into the office, we are bringing our whole self. And so there is that time where we will need personal or quiet time to do things. And we need to provide those spaces where there's privacy and staying connected to the rest of people, space and the culture and the energy, but being still able to do things in a quiet way. And so we look at things like the Fractals Nook, where you can tuck these away. You can still certainly see things, but it's a very visual cue to people around you that you are doing heads down work, and it allows you to focus as well. And so it's the Fractals Nook, which there's a Fractals chair that also can provide that, but this is a little bit more thinking about more heads down work than just having a private moment. And then another lounge, again, feels homey, but could accommodate a number of people working together, coming in and having a conversation, or simply being in the space and absorbing what's going on around. And one of the interesting things about how we're designing spaces, we have that ability to connect or create different moods, I should say, just by changing the tone. So that's the same product we just looked at, but we've completely changed that sense of energy, I think, by just changing the finishes from a brighter, more energized palette before to something more subdued and subtle. That the Vittori, which was also designed during this time by Tuan Nguyen, who this is a really comprehensive line that has so many different variations that can be employed to create massively different experiences with that furniture. But it is this idea of stitching everything together and creating these spaces where people can connect. Now, we started on a small scale here, but then in the Technion division of our organization, we also started, and I'm not going to show the video because we determined earlier that it was too laggy, but we also, based on these concepts, looked at a space, a larger scale space where we are doing things like creating these warm welcome locations for people to come into, like this is a reception, but it has definitely a different feel. The soft, warm, welcoming tones of the wood, especially as people are coming back in. There is going to be, when that happens, there's going to be all those varying levels of comfort with that. Whether it's comfort with the safety aspect, or it's just comfort of shifting away from being in the position we've been in over the last little while. We see, again, locations that allow for dispersion of people to be, if we have social distancing, it doesn't feel sterile, it doesn't feel antiseptic or unwelcoming, which is what we're going to look at. So if you took away the chairs on either side of these tables and you had people dispersed, it's welcoming, it's warm, the tones are good. We will see the need again for these spaces where people connect, not just with the people that are physically there. We also understand that people will be, some people will still be in a remote situation. And this is a far too short of a time period to get in a conversation of how you actually develop hybrid. But we know that having a physical presence doesn't mean or not having a physical presence doesn't mean you're not part of the conversation or present in the experience. Again, the places that people need to tuck in are adjacent to places where there might be more activation, but the culture can still be experienced. People can be seen. You walk past somebody, it's a open image that you can see whoever's there through the glass and know that that's somebody I need to connect with. And just a variety of different concepts of again, looks a little bit more like home, connected to energized places where people would be learning or mentoring or sharing or training. The ease to be able to shift the space into what needs to happen there when it needs to happen. Hackable spaces, which was something we were talking about beforehand, but also now will be a part of, I think, of every space. More so, every organization will need spaces that can ebb and flow. This could easily be a space where you could host a client, have a meeting, take a Zoom call, any of those sort of things. We still will see for sure individual spaces, but maybe not individual nameplates. And that can be this somewhere where somebody can touch down and be and work, still then connect with others, and they can see the rest of things going on around them. And meeting spaces, I think, again, not always those tables that create formality, but also making it much easier for people to connect, and having offers that looks much more, there is something about being in a different posture that allows you to connect a little bit more with people. A library where you bring your own technology, a quiet room where you can do what you need to do, very technologically enabled meeting spaces so that people can be connected. Coffee, as I said, and it was a conversation I had with the whole group of people I was talking with yesterday, because we were going through what you missed and what you didn't about working from home. And coffee was almost 90% of the group I was talking to yesterday, because their organization has the sweetest coffee machine. That connection to the outdoors, that is something, again, we saw a ton of people talking about. One of the things they loved about being at home was being able to connect with nature at a point when they needed to be revitalized. and going for a walk with my dog has been something that has helped me do that, but getting out into nature. So I'm just going to flip through these last ones really quick. And we're at the end because I promised I would stay on time. And that's
Well,
always
I
a
was about
challenge
to
for
give
me.
you
But
the warning finger, Laura Lee.
yeah, perfect. Honest, this is my last picture. But it is really, you know, taken together. This is part of the, you know, you know, this is an opportunity. I think it's very interesting, especially for our industry. I mean, I listened to somebody talk yesterday who goes, you know, I used to tell people I was in the commercial furniture or commercial real estate industry, and they would look at me and like glaze over and not really want to continue a conversation. But nowadays, I talk about tell people you know, am involved with the world of workplace, and they talk my ear off, can't stop them. And it is because it's an exciting time, and not taking the opportunity to learn from this experience. I'm not ever going to say experiment, is one of the most valuable things I think our industry has been given as a gift from this, is to really create spaces that are allowing people to be their truest version of themselves and do their absolute best work, and have an explosion of innovation, I feel, is what's going to happen when we come back together, because we are going to be so excited to be with one another that we will not. And I feel it here, because I come into the office and my colleagues, you know, right before the new year, we were coming in, and man, we had so many things to talk to each other about. It wasn't, you know, a lot of it was work. It was exciting things. So
I think a lot of people
that's
feel
me.
that way, Laura Lee. Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. I think a lot of people feel that way, for sure, for sure. Yeah.
It
Hey,
is,
I
it's
just
my soul.
wanted to make just a little bit of time for some questions.
Yes.
One question that came up was, and I've definitely heard this one multiple times, as we see these hybrid workplaces, they get more open. Yeah, how about sound? How about acoustics? Because that's always a concern. How would you respond to that?
Absolutely. I don't think that we're not going to see walls. Actually, and I would say, as an organization that has a spectacular wall system or category, several systems, we are seeing that burgeoning because of those pockets of places that are going to need to exist. And I showed several of them in those images of places where we as autonomous individuals, step away from the situation that we don't need to be in at that time and go to the place where we need to. What did you do when your kids were screaming their heads off while you were at home working? Some people were in their closets doing Zooms. I've seen some of those. You went outside, but we are in control of where we do our best work and what we need at the time. Our job collectively as people who help our organizations create these spaces is to ensure that they have those places for people to go to. And I think a big part of that will be, it'll be a retraining of people, because we've sent people to offices for so long to go sit in their one room efficiency apartments where we sat there the whole time and didn't move around. And that is, this is the perfect time to help train people and give them that freedom, because I'm sure every one of you on here has a story where you've created a space for a client or an organization that was beautiful and collaborative, and that you saw somebody on the leadership team go like this when they saw somebody sitting there and doing differently than what everybody was doing.
That actually leads to the next question,
Yeah.
Laura Lee. You just talked about the freedom, and I've definitely encountered this, and I'm sure most people have heard this. You have companies that fully want to embrace hybrid. They're really excited about it, and then come the rules. Well, but I have to be in at a certain day or time, and you see all these different rules. Well, what would you say to that?
No. So here's my analogy, and I know a few people on the call have heard me say this before, because it came to me like a ton of bricks at some point last year. Going back to the office, mandated with a full set of rules on how things are going to go is like moving back with your parents when you're 40 years old and them implementing all of your teenage rule sets, like of, hey, your curfew is, your thing is, no, it is not going to work. And I tell you, the people that have the hardest job right now, or maybe need to have the hardest reckoning right now, is within leadership and the people making decisions about how things are going to happen. The most amount of work is going to be from them. Guess who's been working 2 years and figured out how to do the things they do and know themselves better and have figured it out? Simply, leadership needs to actually ask every organization. And if organizations have not started and haven't been throughout this situation, I really can't stress enough how much they really need to start asking what people want, because the answer lies within there, and then the work has to be done on getting it set. It's not easy. Nobody said this was going to be easy, but we've taken the easy route for a long time. We've stayed within the parameters of a structure that was created over 100 years ago. That doesn't push us forward. It keeps us in a box. And if I don't know if anybody did my creative thinking CEU at any time, but when you're uncomfortable and it's a bit messy and it's hard, that's when the true innovation and the most extraordinary results happen. And if organizations would just turn to their people and say, what do you need? Who do you need to work with? Where do you need to work? What do you need to do your job? I think we would be in a far better, I think a lot of places would be in a far better organization than simply dictating and having a set of rules and creating the structure. People have been trusted, organizations have been trusting people to do things for this really long time, and to pull back on that trust now with a bunch of rules is going to be hard, which is, again, watch social media. We're not really in that place right now because we're not really ready to go back. With our current situation, but if you make me go back to exactly how it was, I'm not coming.
Okay. Well, one more question that came up, and I actually want to add a little bit to that one as well. So productivity is crucial still for a lot of organizations, depending a little bit on the industry, but there is definitely still a need to measure that productivity. How can you create kind of a win-win situation that both benefits the company and their people? And what I wanted to add to that, going back to what you said earlier in your conversation, is also, you talked about well-being and effectiveness. So how would you measure that in the space and in the organization?
Well-being
and productivity and well-being
okay.
and effectiveness.
So that question right there, how do you measure productivity? How is it being measured before? Because I don't know that many organizations that actually could effectively say how their productivity was being measured before, except for maybe call centers and like data entry keystrokes. And again, this is where all that hard work is going to have to happen. I don't know if anybody's had therapy before, but you're all happy and going diddly along all good until you start with the therapist, and then they crash your whole world in and tell you have to do the work. Got to do the work. And that's where we're at, is that determining, having a better determination of how your people are able to be their absolute best and create the best solutions, is having people who feel like they can create their best work, that feel like they're making a contribution, that feel that they're valued, that feel respected and cared for. And that's well-being. When you are being effective, and that's one of those things I think I know there's a few people on here I've had this conversation with. Absolutely, when we said, oh, productivity was fine, I said at the beginning, maybe some people were more productive in working remotely. we weren't experimenting. People were in fear of their jobs, first off. So man, they were working way too hard. But also that's the autonomy part where all of the sudden, guess what? I am responsible for when I do my best work. And you know what? I am not a morning person. And my boss is on here and she will attest to that. I have peak work between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. And if I'm allowed to do my work, I've also learned to put all my emails in drafts so people don't know that's when I'm working, but because, but and then I'm allowed to sleep to the point that I want and come to work when I'm focused and alert. That autonomy will get that, giving people that ability to work when it's best for them, how they do their best work, where they do their best work with connection to the people that they need to. The output, their effectiveness is far better. Productivity is one thing, but being effective is a completely different thing. And we can always be productive from home, but we are far more effective when we're together. Yeah. The impact is exponentially greater.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Laura-Lee. This has been like very interesting, very topical, and lots to think about. I think really what I think a lot of us probably realize, it's a challenge, but that also makes it fun.
I will leave you all with one last thing. If especially if you're struggling within your own organizations or with a client to help them do some understanding, there is a fabulous TED Talk by Debbie Kovich. It's 12 minutes long, 12 minutes of like every leader should watch this right now. And it's much of what I just said is like me spewing out exactly what she said, because man, it did that woman click with me. She's the founder of Boston Consulting. So, I mean, she's got a lot of weight behind what she says. Debbie Kovich.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Really
go watch
appreciate
it.
that. Yeah.
That was a C or a K, Laura-Lee?
C, C-O-V-I-C-H.
Kovich.
Yeah. It's what leaders should know. Every leader should know about the future of work, I think is what it's called.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Laura-Lee. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We are at the 1 minute to 1 right now. So excellent time. And thank you for that. We will be sending out an email later today with a survey for everybody. We ask you to quickly fill out that survey and let us know what kind of topics you want to see in the future. It really helps us improve our events and have relevant information for you. I mentioned earlier, but just as a reminder, next month on February 24th will be our next CEU accredited presentation. So more information will follow. Or you can go to chaseoffice.ca/events, where also the video of this presentation will be posted. So thank you very much on behalf of Chase Office Interiors. We really enjoyed having you, Laura-Lee. And also, of course, to those I haven't wished to yet, Happy New Year and all the best wishes for 2022.
Thanks, Laura-Lee.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Excellent, Laura-Lee. Great to see
Thanks.
you.
I always love talking.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Love it.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.